Hi, my name is Joy Axelson. In this lecture of Micah, we will be looking at some BRI information. We will look at some historical background, a bit about the author, the original readers, the type of literature, and the dating of the book. So who is Micah? Well, let's read Micah chapter 1, verse 1. And it says, "The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, the kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem." So we see that he is from Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, and he spoke about Israel and Judah. It is thought that he is most likely from Moresheth Gath, which was about 40 kilometers southwest of Jerusalem, near Gath, near the border with the Philistines. And this would have been a border town which would have suffered a lot during the times that Judah was in wars with Israel, and also they were oppressed by the Assyrians. So this town that he came from would have suffered a lot. We see that Micah is called a prophet to the poor because he focused so much on the injustice and suffering of the normal person. Example, and the farmers in the countryside. We see he has a heart and a compassion for the normal person. And we see this in his description of the farmers whose fields are being taken away. We see that in Micah 2, verse 2 through 3. We see his imagery of the shepherd and sheep in Micah 2, 12, and so on. We see the idea of plowing of fields in chapter 3, verse 12, chapter 4, verse 3, and so on. There are some scholars, especially in the 19th century, that have trouble with Micah because some of the oracles, the predictions, especially those like about Babylon, which doesn't happen until 200 years later, so they think that part of Micah was written after the return from exile. But I mean, that's a lot with the other prophets too, so I don't have any trouble with that. So who are the original reader and the original audience? Even though Micah does have a prophecy concerning Israel, in Micah chapter 1, verse 2 through 8, his audience would be Judah, because all the rest of the oracles are about Judah, and he's in Judah. His audience is more, as we said, that is the common people and the local rulers. He does talk to the wealthy, the priests, the false prophets in Judah. While one of his contemporary prophets is Isaiah, but Isaiah's focus is more in Jerusalem and is with the king and the people of influence there in Jerusalem. Other contemporary prophets to Micah is Hosea and Amos, who are ministering in the nation of Israel. So what is the condition? What is the heart of the original reader, original audience? We see that they're involved in idolatry and empty religion, that the wealthy are oppressing the poor. We see that they're taking advantage of people, that there's pride, there's evil, and there's injustice. Leaders, such as judges, are taking bribes and they do injustice. The prophets take money and they prophesy good things so that they can get wealthy. So we really see the oppression of the poor for greed, the false gods and idols. There's corruption of civil and religious leaders. There's pride and self-sufficiency. Leaders, like the judges, take bribes. False prophets prophesy for money. So it's not a very good situation for the original reader, especially the leadership. Micah has also been called the little Isaiah because there's some passages which are almost exactly the same, or there are a lot of the same ideas. For example, The picture of going to the mountain of the Lord in Micah chapter 4 verse 2 and 3 is almost exactly as Isaiah chapter 2 verse 2 through 4. The image of the Exodus, the idea of a highway going through the sea, we see that in Micah 7 verse 9, ideas in chapter 7 verse 15 and 19. And that's also in Micah 7, 15 through 19. We see that also in Isaiah 11, verse 15 through 17. So some think that either Isaiah influenced Micah or Micah influenced Isaiah. It doesn't matter. I think God can speak the same to his prophets, and it's probably both of their audience needed the same imagery and the same ideas. There are differences, though, between Isaiah and Micah. Isaiah's focus was in the city of Jerusalem, to the aristocrats, to those in leadership and in power. Of course, his was to Judah and surrounding nations. It was more political focus, and we see that he brought the prophecy of the Messiah being born to a virgin. Whereas Micah, he's more in the country, to the common man, both to Israel and Judah, but mostly Judah. Focused on social injustice and seeing the Messiah born in Bethlehem. So now let's look at some historical background of Micah. Micah prophesied during the days of the kings of Judah, Jotham, which was 750 through 732 BC, Ahaz 735 through 715 BC, and Hezekiah 729 through 686 BC. So remember to look at your king's assignment, get more details of what happened under these kings. I'm just going to review a couple of key things under each rule of these kings. So this was the end of the golden age that Judah and Israel experienced under the reign of Jeroboam II of Israel and Uzziah in Judah. There was a rise of cities during the time and a rise of wealth in the middle class. During this period, people got wealthy and they started abusing their power over the poor. The priests and the judges were involved in corruption and bribery. So a review of each of these kings. Jotham, he did what was right in the sight of God, but the people were still corrupt and involved in idolatry. He also did not remove the high places, so the people still worshipped and sacrificed to idols there. Prosperity from the golden age was brought in injustice and class division through greed. So God brought in judgment through the form of this king having trouble from Israel and Syria. And we see that in 2 Kings 15 verse 32. Around 733 BC, Syria and Israel made an alliance against Assyria. Then we come to Ahaz. He was a very bad king. He made images of Baal. He sacrificed his son to Molech. He even sacrificed on every high place everywhere. He built an altar after the gods of Damascus. He shut up the house of God. Syria and Israel wanted him to join their alliance against Assyria, but he refused and he asked for Assyria's help instead, even though the prophet Isaiah had warned him and called him to trust in God instead of seeking help from Assyria, but he refused. And we see that in Isaiah chapter 7. Judah became a vassal of Assyria, and they had to pay high tribute to them. So we see Ahaz took money from his own treasure house. He took gold from the house of God, and he taxed the people very much. So it could be that the wealthy people, they did not want to give up their luxurious life that they experienced under the golden age. So perhaps they oppressed the poor and tried to take seizing their lands, like we see in Micah 2, chapter 2, verse 1 through 2, as a way to pay these taxes. And there was bribery of judges going on. You know, there's just corruption everywhere. So there was social injustice and moral decline. Then we see Hezekiah come in. He was a godly king. He brought in religious reforms, and he removed the high places and the false altars. These reforms might have been started by, influenced by Micah's prophecies, because we see in Jeremiah chapter 26, verse 18 and 19, where Micah chapter 3, verse 12 is quoted, and Isaiah, and it says there that Isaiah listened to his message of judgment and repented, and God stopped judgment from coming. Hezekiah eventually stopped paying tribute to Assyria and refortified his army and the cities of Judah. He decided to trust in God, and God saved them from Sennacherib in 701 BC. So some important dates to remember is 735 BC, where the alliance between Syria and Israel was formed. 734 through 732 BC, you have Tiglath-Pileser III had a campaign against Syria, Ammon, Edom, Moab, Israel, and Judah. And Syria, Moab, Edom, Judah, and Israel had to pay tribute to him. In 732, we have the fall of Damascus. In 726 through 722, Shalmaneser V oppressed Israel a lot and died invading Israel. 722, we have the fall of Samaria by Assyria, the fall of the nation of Israel. In 701, you have Assyria, Sennacherib, surrounded Jerusalem, but God delivered them during Hezekiah's reign. So when was Micah written? Well, we know it have to be written somewhere between 750 and 686 BC. Perhaps we can kind of reduce the years. Maybe the date started when Jotham began his sole reign, because he co-reigned for a few years, in 740, 739 BC. Perhaps the prophecies against Israel in Micah chapter 1 most likely happened before 722, the fall of Jerusalem. And part of the prophecies concerning Judah happened right around Hezekiah's reign, when he became the sole ruler of Judah in 715 BC, or soon thereafter, because of what happened we saw in Jeremiah 26 verse 18 through 19, and his response to repenting because of Micah's prophecies of judgment, and perhaps this influenced Hezekiah to bring on the reforms and the revival, but we don't know for sure. So maybe somewhere between 720 and 710. So what type of literature is Micah? Again, like the other prophets, is prophetic poetry. There are the three main oracles, or cycles, which we talked about under the structure of the book. There are also many law oracles. There are promise oracles, woe oracles. There's an enacted symbol in chapter 1 verse 8, laments, and so on. But there's one unique feature in Micah, which we see in Micah chapter 1 verse 10 through 15 and Micah chapter 7 verse 18, and it is a play on words. So let's read Micah 7 verse 18, and it says, who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity, passing over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance. So who is a God like you? Well, that's a play on word of Micah's name, which means who is like Yahweh. So he also does this in chapter 1. He uses the names of Judah towns to show a message. And so he uses the meanings of the names of those towns, or words in Hebrew that sound like the names of those towns. And we'll look more at that when we look at chapter 1. So Micah speaks out against the oppression and social injustice against the poor by the rulers, by the wealthy, by the priests and the prophets. He calls the people to obey God, to do justice and mercy. So hopefully you found some helpful information in this lecture to help you with your BRI. Thank you.